What's up, everybody? I'm JC. I'm joined by my wife, Brittany, our dog, Pepper. And today we're going to be talking about how to have difficult conversations with your family and with your friends. We're just going to shorten that and say loved ones. If you love somebody, how do you have a difficult conversation with them? So today we're going to be talking about why having those difficult conversations matters, some strategies for how to approach those difficult conversations. We're going to talk about some boundaries that you need to set. We're going to get into a lot of different elements surrounding difficult conversations. If you want to call it conflict, if you want to call it difficult conversations, whatever you like, call it that. We're going to be just looking at how to do it well. Another thing to note, and we actually discussed this on our last podcast, is that we are doing this work with you. I think sometimes people see people on the internet and they think expert, professional, should have it all together. That's not the case. We're an expert in that we know this information and want to share it with you. We are not professionals where we are proficient in this stuff. We are on this journey with you. We say it all the time. We are developing these things personally in our lives because we want better lives. We absorb this material. We surround ourselves and kind of swim in this material of how to better our communication, how to better our relationships, and how to better ourselves so that we can just be better. Mm-hmm. And we want that same for you. That's the only reason we're sharing this information, is we want you to have that same opportunity to be better with us. Make sense? So first, I want to talk about why having difficult conversations matter. This is something where a lot of people, including me, I would say less so now, more so in the past, would look at a difficult conversation and make assessments of whether it was worth having that conversation or not. And would that be the same for you?
No, I just wouldn't have them.
Okay. Yeah, but I think that's a lot of people. I guess I have more of a proclivity to engage in difficult conversations just because of my personality, just because of some of the positions I've been in. I don't like it, though.
Right.
I don't think anyone, unless you're like a psychopath, I don't really think you like difficult conversations ever. That's why they're difficult. But they matter because they are an opportunity. And this is how you need to, we talked about this when we talked about conflict as a whole. You need to reframe it as, this is good. This is an opportunity to deepen my relationships. So if you're having a difficult conversation with a family member, this is an opportunity to deepen that relationship with that family member or a friend or a child or a spouse. It doesn't really matter who you're having that difficult conversation with. It's an opportunity. So if you can reframe your mind to think of it in that way, that helps you as you start to approach that conversation. Mm-hmm. So that's one way that it is important. Another way is the fact that there are these like unspoken tensions that you just don't want to harbor with your friends and family. It just
usually it's the tension that makes whatever it is that you want to talk about difficult.
Yes. Especially if that tension is allowed to remain for longer and longer periods of time.
Because usually then everybody is kind of either tiptoeing around the whatever it is or just avoiding it altogether because it's uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable, yep.
And it just feels better to let's just not talk about it.
But what that does by tiptoeing around that conversation or not having that conversation is that it starts to create resentment, and it starts to create these negative feelings towards the people that we should and need to have the difficult conversations with. And I've dealt with this personally, where I would rather deal with the resentment of a conversation that hasn't even been had than have the conversation.
Yeah.
And it's so easy. It's so easy to fall into that trap of like, I'll just deal with the resentment, or I'll just deal with the, hatred of that person, or I'll deal with the, talking behind their back. I'll do all of those things.
It's just easier. It's easier to do that, even though it's not as helpful. And you probably would feel better if you were able to have the difficult conversation. But yeah, it's just easier to not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, and this goes to the third reason why it's important to have these conversations, you're going to grow from having them.
Yeah.
There's personal growth, there's personal development that occurs when you're able to have a difficult conversation and get through it.
Yeah.
The other side of that, you're going to learn so much more about your emotional intelligence. You're going to learn so much more about how to communicate more effectively. It is going to develop you so much in your life to have these conversations.
Yeah, I think it's in that personal growth, it's going to make you feel free. At least I found that for me as I've gotten better. Like, I still have a long way to go when it comes to having difficult conversations, but I find that the freedom that comes along with facing my fear, because usually that's what it is. I'm afraid of the person's reaction or how it might damage our relationship.
Yeah.
And so I live in fear. But when I'm able to actually face that fear, it gives you a newfound freedom. One, because you might have resolved the tension that you're feeling.
Right.
And then two, you feel more empowered or courageous to do it again.
Yeah.
And I know for me that's been like, it's still a slow process for me, but there's times where I'm like, I notice that I'm afraid of a conversation, and I'm like, why am I afraid of this? Like, why can't I just say it? Why can't I just address it? And so I think it's kind of a slow growth, but doing those difficult conversations one at a time, and there's kind of a way to go about it, which we'll talk about. But I find that helps me to live in freedom and realize when I am afraid of having a conversation. And then it just makes me aware of, well, maybe this is another conversation that I need to have soon.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that we can do, and we're going to talk about kind of how to prepare for having a difficult conversation. One thing, and it's not in our notes, but it just came to mind, and it's something that's been very helpful for us in our relationship, is to check assumptions. And this is like a needing to having a difficult conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Or as a difficult conversation, light conversation. Like, hey, maybe don't talk about the big thing that is making it a difficult conversation. Maybe use this skill that we're going to talk about right now of checking assumptions.
Yeah.
Before you have the big conflict, before you have the big difficult conversation with a family or friend.
A lot of times that is the difficult conversation. Like, you're making it to seem bigger than it is, when really it's just an assumption that needs to be clarified.
Right. Well, let's talk about what that actually is.
Okay.
So checking assumptions is how you're able to not put your mind on the other person's mind. So how you're able to check if the things that you are thinking is the same that they are thinking.
Can you give an example?
So we'll go back to an earlier podcast where you gave the example of, let me see. I can't even remember the example. It was something about like, does this dress make me look good?
The dress example?
Yeah. Does this dress make me look good? Well, that's not really a good example for this. We'll just say, let's say I think that you think I...
Okay, I've got one.
You got one. Okay, good.
I've got one. Okay, so
I don't actually want to start like a difficult conversation by making an example.
We're gonna have a difficult conversation after this podcast.
I'm just like, oh man.
So this is a hypothetical situation.
Okay.
So I might be at home and like working really hard to get the house really clean and be a little angry. Like, I might be angry at you because I'm like, he wants me to have the house clean and the food ready, but I haven't had a break this whole week. And I really wish that I could just go out shopping or something.
Yeah.
So maybe that's happening in my mind. Right. And so I say no to things about doing things that I would want to do. Like maybe a friend asked me out and I'm like, no, like I can't do that because I need to make sure that the house is clean before my husband gets home. But I'm just assuming that.
Right. You're assuming that I would think a certain way about you if you didn't accomplish that.
So I'm angry. So let's say the specific example is, let's say my girlfriend says, hey, do you want to go out shopping tonight? And I am just kind of annoyed because I'm annoyed at my husband because I can't do that. I'm assuming, I'm thinking that he will be upset if I go out and I leave the house a mess. And so instead of just me being angry, like I have to do all this stuff and I never get a break, I could just say, hey, would you be upset if I like go out tonight? I think that you want me to always have the house clean every night before you get home. And then that gives you the chance to say, no, that's ridiculous. Like I'll help you clean up. And then it resolves this huge thing. It doesn't have to be a big, difficult conversation.
So just slow it down a little bit because you went a little fast through, I think that you think this. So that's the strategy to say, I think. So you're putting your thoughts on your thoughts. And then you're saying that you think because they have their own thoughts and they're not yours. This, whatever that is, whatever that thing is that you're assuming the other person is thinking. And then you ask them, is that correct? Don't leave it hanging there. I've seen people do that where they'll say, I think that you think this. And then they just leave it to float in the air like that.
Oh, like specifically ask, is that true?
Is this true? Is this correct? Am I assuming correctly? However you want to say it. And that gives the person the freedom and the opportunity to express their true thoughts, which are coming from their brain, not yours.
And it gives you the freedom to then be released from that burden that wasn't there in the first place.
Right.
Or maybe it was, but at least now you know.
Because even in just your example there, like we talked about with why not harboring those tensions that come with having a difficult conversation with a family or friend, releasing that stuff through finding out the truth of things is so important. Because just in your example, you had resentment, you had anger, you had jealousy, there's a lot of emotions there. And just a small thing like, I think my husband will think less of me or will be mad at me or disappointed or whatever if I don't do this thing.
Right.
Without asking them, without saying, is this true?
Right.
You want to give people the opportunity to be an authority over their own thoughts.
Right.
So that's like a pre-strategy to how to strategize and prepare for a difficult conversation. So,
and can I add one more thing to that?
Yeah,
I think it also helps, checking assumptions also helps you to avoid having difficult conversations, even like with the other person. So what I mean is, like, I find that I'm getting better at this. And so more often I'll just check in like with you and I'll be like, hey, do you mind if I like stay out a little bit later?
Yeah.
Or do you mind if I buy this? Do you mind if I do that? And that helps that other person be, especially if it's your spouse, feel like they're a part of that decision so that they can not be resentful too. Like,
yeah, that's very specific to like a relationship.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking more in a relationship for that, but
good advice. But this is more someone that's maybe you're in relationship with. I mean, more of an intimate relationship. That's more.
Yeah,
what you're
I guess you wouldn't do that with like.
You're not going to check in with a friend and be like, "Is it okay if I buy this?" Or like, "What?"
That would be weird.
What? Or even a family member would be a little weird.
That only works with your spouse.
Right. So I know what you're saying, and it's good.
Yeah,
that's a good example. But for this specifically, for having those difficult conversations with a family member, which we all know, and we even have that family member in mind, and a friend, how do we prepare for that? one of the ways is to clarify your intentions. So as you prepare for that difficult conversation that you need to have because it's important, you need to clarify why. You need to have a clear picture of why this conversation needs to happen.
Yeah.
Or if it needs to happen, because sometimes we're just in our heads about something. And once we actually sit down and clarify why it needs to happen, we say, maybe it really doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I found that is the most important, is figuring out what is the goal of this conversation that I'm thinking about having. And I know we've talked about this tool before, but the ladder of integrity, we've talked about that before, but that is usually the most helpful tool for me to clarify my goals for this conversation. Because sometimes you have so many emotions behind why you want to just get this tension off your shoulders, right? And have this conversation, that you don't actually know why you feel what you do, and you don't actually know what your intentions are. You're just kind of angry or hurt or whatever it is. And so anyway, there's this tool called the ladder of integrity that we've used and we do use.
You can find it online, just Google it.
Yeah. And I love it. Like I've done it a couple times where it's helped me have a conversation, a difficult conversation, but I've also used it sometimes and I realized that the issue was just with me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't with the other person. It was like an issue I had to work on myself about, and they didn't do anything wrong.
No. And so the ladder of integrity, just so you know how to use it, it's basically a list of questions. There are some out there with 10 questions. There are some out there with 12 questions. Both are good. It basically allows you to go through a process of looking at yourself, looking at the situation, looking at the other person, and getting clarity on what the issue is, on what the difficult thing that you're going to have to converse with them about is. And like Britt said, you might get done with those questions and say, oh, it was just a me thing. It was just a me problem. It was just something that I needed to work out because the emotional state was dictating my response to thinking I needed to have a difficult conversation. Sometimes it's just we're in an emotional state and just need to work through those emotions. That's totally acceptable. And congratulations, you worked through something and grew from that experience. It's not a bad thing to be thinking about, I need to have a difficult conversation, realize you don't. Awesome.
And I guess the other thing about that tool, if you do decide to use it, is sometimes it's helpful to fill it out and then like fill it out a couple more times and give yourself space and time in between filling it out, because the first dump on the ladder might be just that, like a dump, and you haven't really gotten to everything that's in your mind and heart. And so you might have to do it a second or a third time to really kind of get clarity on what's going on.
And as you're doing it and you go through and you're like, this conversation still has to happen. At least this helps you get to, what is my goal? When you're clarifying your intentions and preparing for a difficult conversation, that's the aim. What's my goal for this conversation? That's really what you want to work out. And then second, and this goes back to, you can do this through the ladder of integrity, or you can just do this with a self-check. Check your emotions. How am I feeling right now? Am I angry? Am I resentful? Am I jealous? Am I fearful? You know, you have to really look at all of those things as you approach the difficult conversation.
Yeah. And when you so I feel like those emotions are almost always there, at least for me. But once I feel like the process of figuring out your intentions for the conversation will help you. Like, you'll just have to work through those emotions. Like tell me if you disagree with this, but once you get to the intention of the conversation, I feel like your emotions are more in check because you understand why you feel the way you do. If you don't understand why you feel the way you do yet, you're probably not ready to have the conversation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. like you said, though, those emotions probably won't go away even during the difficult conversation. So you might,
But if you don't understand them, that's probably
you
going
need
to
to
be a problem.
understand them to the point that you can keep them under control.
Yeah.
Because maybe the conversation has to happen before you can release some of
Right.
those emotions.
That's, yeah.
So I'm not saying you got to be free of these of any emotion going into a difficult conversation. Emotion can also guide you in a difficult conversation because it can help you be more real and authentic
Right.
in that conversation. So I don't want to say like get rid of emotions, but know the emotions you're
Like,
experiencing
and why you're having them. I would
Right.
say because otherwise that's going to confuse me.
so that you can remain calm
Yes.
during the conversation. Because if you're going to go into it, and we've talked about this with fighting is not conflict. It's completely different. Fighting is an emotional action that's taking place that's not going to have any prudent, fruit-giving resolution. It's just going to make people hate each other more. It's just going to make people more angry.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that your emotions are in check, not free of them, but in check while you have that conversation. And one of the ways to do that, is one, like you said, to know what you're feeling, but also, can I empathize with how the other person is going to feel in this conversation? Sometimes just getting yourself out of your own head and your own emotions and your own thoughts and just putting yourself in the other person's shoes, even if you're pissed off at them, even if you're like, oh my gosh, this again, this family member again, this friend again, ugh. Put yourself in their shoes and say, how are they going to react when I approach this conversation? That's really helpful sometimes to just help you empathize with them. Because if you're going to have a difficult conversation and you're going to grow from it and you're going to develop from it and it's going to deepen your relationship, then you want to be able to have empathy for the person.
Yeah.
You're not going to deepen anything if you can't empathize with your family member or friend.
And you're also not going to be able to listen to their responses either very well.
Well, because it really just says if empathy is not your goal, or it doesn't have to be a part of the equation of your preparation for the difficult conversation, it means that you actually don't care about the relationship.
Yeah.
You're approaching the difficult conversation desiring to win. Which you could do.
Won't help you though.
No, it won't help anything. It won't help the relationship. Beating somebody doesn't deepen a relationship. Negotiating with them through conflict and coming out where both parties are winning deepens a relationship. So I think that's just very, very helpful to get yourself out of your own head, get yourself out of your own emotions, and think about how that other person is feeling. And then lastly, we talk about this all the time in relationships. Be timely.
Oh, yeah.
What timeliness is choosing the right time, place, setting for the conversation to happen.
Yeah.
Do not do it when that person is in a poor emotional state or you are in a poor emotional state. Do not do it when it's very late or very early. Do not.
Or when you're going to have to leave or that person is going to have to leave
as
shortly.
they're walking out the door, like late for work. Like, can I just ask you something?
Yeah,
Let's spark a difficult conversation right now. Don't do that. Choose the right time. An easy way to do this is to set a time.
Yeah.
To choose a time together. Like, hey, I need to talk to you. Can we put a time down where we know that we're going to talk?
Yeah.
You don't have to tell them the whole deal. Like, we're going to be talking about this. No. Don't stress them out for the entire day. And the reason for doing that, you don't want to stress them out by introducing the difficult conversation before you're having it, because that allows them to go and create more anger, more animosity,
And
more resentment.
a lot of assumptions,
And a lot of assumptions, before the conversation actually happens. So you're going to have a poorer start to the conversation because of the time that they had to mull over, well, what are they going to say? And what did I do wrong? And all of these questions that haven't been answered because you didn't have the conversation yet.
Right.
So just set the time. Say, I just want to talk. It's not going to be, we don't have to talk for a long time. I just need to talk about a specific thing. If that's okay, let's set a time for that to happen.
Yeah, you want to make sure it is enough time, though. Make sure you have enough time to fully finish the conversation.
Enough time, not too much time.
Right.
What I would say too, and this is...
How do you know it's too much time, though?
If you're... So usually in a conversation, if it's not going well, people tend to repeat. And if you're repeating something, either party, if they're repeating arguments more than 3 times, you should just stop.
Yeah.
That conversation is devolving.
Yeah.
I would say if the argument didn't work the first time, or at least wasn't heard well the first time, it's not going to work the second or third time, or fourth or fifth. Or
would you say it's okay to just at that point just be like, hey, maybe we can touch base about this another time?
Yeah. Oh, I would recommend that.
Yeah. That way you're not just shutting down the conversation.
No.
But you're just giving space to be like, hey, we'll just try this again another time.
Yeah, I would just say, like, you could take a break, or you could say, all right, can we go away and think about this?
Yeah.
But both of us. We got some of this out. Let's go away. Let's think about this, and then let's come back and talk about it again.
And I just want to also put in there that the place, I know we said this, the place does matter though. Depending on what the conversation involves. Like if you need to have some privacy, or you need to not be around like the office people or the kids or other family members, whatever it is, just make sure that you're picking a place that is the right place. It just depends on what kind of conversation you're having and what it involves. But that's important too. Like where you choose to do it at.
Yeah. Where you choose to do it, when you choose to do it. And then let's talk about how to do it well. Let's talk about some effective strategies for communicating when you have to have the difficult conversation. The first one is to start and end with I statements. So instead of saying,
you did this.
Right, exactly. Instead of accusational statements like you, or even just making generalities like people have been saying, or
so a different one for that would be I have noticed.
Right.
Or
you make everything personal.
Yeah.
You make everything personal, not like, everyone knows, or people have been saying, or you accusatory, have been doing. You're saying I have noticed, or I have seen, or I have, experienced personally, whatever it is. Just changing it to make it more personal again brings the conversation down to where it's just you and that person.
Right.
You're not bringing in other testimonies,
right,
to that. You're not bringing in where it's now 5 against 1, like this whole family against this person.
Yeah, it does take practice to talk like that, because I think a lot of us aren't used to that. But even when you're expressing things that maybe that person did hurt you, saying it in such a way that it's not accusatory. Like when you said that, it made me feel this way because I thought that maybe you meant this.
Yeah.
Or things like that, where you're not saying what you did that and it did this to me. I mean, that is kind of what you're saying, but you're not accusing them. You're saying when you did that thing that you're not saying you meant to hurt me. You're just saying when you did that thing, it made me feel this way, or I thought this thing. So that way you're just letting them be aware of how it affected you without saying like you meant to do that and I'm mad at you for it.
Right. And there's such poor communication when you make statement like accusations, like, you know, you make me feel. No one can make you feel anything. That's a choice on your part to have felt that way.
Right.
Now, when they do something, you could feel a certain way.
Right.
So,
what they did maybe did make you feel that way,
but they can't make you feel that. So accusing them of their action making you feel a certain way is different than saying, I don't know why I feel this way when you do this, but I do. And I just want to express that, like, when you raise your voice, I feel scared. Whatever. You know, like, that's something that is very personal. It's very, you know, in the we're just here for each other conversation. And it's not accusatory or attacking.
Yeah.
And it just helps move the conversation, like, because what you're doing by not accusing, by not attacking, even though it might feel good in the moment, is you're actually allowing for the conversation to move forward more.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you attack, that conversation stops.
Yeah.
That person puts up defenses, puts up a wall, and that conversation will not go further.
Yeah. It takes humility to do that, but that then leaves space for you to hear their side and be corrected.
Yeah.
So you can, when it looks obvious to you, you're like, this is pretty obvious that this person, you know, did this purposefully. Like, they knew it hurt me. Then, but when you don't accuse them, you leave room for them to say something that might surprise you. You just don't know. You don't know until they explain themselves, and you might realize, oh, okay. Like, I have examples in my head that I can recall where I've been super upset. Like, how does this person not know that wouldn't hurt me? Yeah. And then when I talk to them about it, they didn't. Like, they have good reasons why. And I'm like, okay, I stand corrected. Like, I that's surprising to me, but yeah, you don't know. Yeah. And so going and accusing them is not gonna help you, and definitely not the relationship. Yeah.
And one thing too to avoid, and this kind of goes to being accusatory, is using general statements. Like, you always, or all the time, or, you know, what's another one? Is there any other ones? You always, like, or you never do this thing. You know, those are generalities. Hopefully, if you prepared to have that difficult conversation, you would have gotten to more specific things. Like,
you have to use specific things if you want a result.
Right.
It's, first of all, it's not fair to be general.
No.
And also you're just not going to fix anything because they don't know what specific thing you're upset about.
Right. The person can't give you the world in one conversation. So you need to be specific about what you want. That's why in the preparation, you clarified your goal for that conversation. Like, hopefully by the end of this conversation, I help them to understand how not putting their clothes in the laundry basket makes my day longer and makes me more tired, or whatever it is. If that's your goal, be specific. You know, this is what I feel, this is what happens, and the goal for this conversation is that you put your socks in the hamper. You know, or whatever it is. So be specific, not general, in the conversations. And going back multiple podcasts now, get better at active listening, where when you speak, allow the person to answer you and don't interrupt them. Allow them to fully express why they don't put those socks in the hamper. Right. Because they're tired, or a bad shot, or whatever it is, you know. actually hear that person out and give them, this is a hopefully this conversation is with a family member or a friend that you love. Give them love by listening to them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it goes back to what we've said before. Just don't assume you know the answer, and you're not going in for the win. You're going in to understand. You're going in to resolve. You're going in to better your relationship with that person. So it's helpful to, when you present those things, those I statements, that when they speak, that you actually listen to understand. So when they say something, you can be like, oh, well, maybe we can just, maybe we both can change the way we do things. That would, it sounds like that would help both of us. And you'll have new ways of resolving the issue that you wouldn't have thought of before, because you were intentionally, actively listening to what that person has to say to better the situation.
Yep. And stay calm. Stay calm throughout this conversation. The reason that you checked your emotions when preparing for the conversation was so that you could stay calm in the conversation. But if you notice that those emotions are coming back to the surface, that anger, that resentment, that fear, that whatever it is, pause the conversation.
Yeah.
It's like I said with fighting. If it's going to get to a fight, it's not even worth having. So pause the conversation. Say, let's just cool down, go get a drink, go to the bathroom, whatever. Let's come back to it when we're cooler.
Right.
Just know that I want to deepen my relationship with you through this conversation. I know it's difficult. So when emotions flare, you could even establish that honestly at the beginning of the conversation. Like when you're going to have this difficult conversation, you can say, hey, if I have a little bit of anger right now, if that comes up in any way that makes you feel, you know, that emotion, and you're not feeling what I'm saying, you're feeling the anger, tell me so we can take a break.
Yeah.
That we can stop. Give that person the authority to say, hey, chill. I can just feel that you're just super angry with me right now. And we're just talking. Cool. Take a break. Come back to it. That's a really nice way of giving them something at the beginning of a difficult conversation where they feel like they have like a red flag to put up.
Yeah.
You know, so they can say, hey.
I think it's important with any of the emotions, because even if you're super like hurt and sad and upset and you start to kind of lose it, start to cry, that's going to change the conversation too, and not for the better, because either that other person's going to cave in because you're crying or they're crying, or you're not going to be able to finish communicating well what's going on and what you want to talk about because you can't think well anymore. And so, that pausing will benefit the conversation.
Yeah. So there's a lot that you can do to prepare, and there's a lot that you can do in the conversations to make them go better. But it's still a difficult conversation. That's the whole title of this video. It's a difficult conversation. How do we navigate that if there are challenges that arise? And one of those challenges is if we are dealing with a family member or friend that is easily defensive. If they are easily as soon as you try to embark on a conversation with them, their defenses go up, their shackles go up, their walls go up. And it's just like, oh my goodness, trying to navigate around those is just tiresome. How do you navigate through that? And one of the best ways, and this also helps you stay calm through that process, is by being curious. And I've heard other people say, turn to wonder. Like, especially because their defenses are going to feel like attacks to you.
And then you're going to get defensive.
Right. So one thing to do is realize that they're being defensive, not attacking, and trying to differentiate between that. And then when you see that it's defensiveness, turn to curiosity, turn to wonder, and put out there, and this is a navigation tool, how you navigate their defenses, turn to asking questions or trying to navigate the conversation by seeing why this wall went up or seeing why they're struggling with this aspect of the conversation. Like just turning to, thinking through why those defenses went up.
Yeah.
What is it about what I said? What is it about this conversation that is causing you to become defensive? Just asking those types of things helps slowly maybe bring down some of those walls so that maybe you can get a little deeper in that conversation and a little deeper towards actually having the difficult part of the conversation.
Because that helps them feel heard. When you are pointing out what you notice, that helps, lower their defenses and then help them feel heard. Like if you're like, I noticed that you're starting to yell or you seem really angry about this topic. Can you tell me why? Or why does this upset? All those questions are going to help them feel heard and therefore lower their defenses.
Yeah. Yeah. And with defensiveness, a lot of times people will just not want to have the conversation altogether. Just like you were probably avoiding many of these difficult conversations. A lot of your family and friends don't want to have those difficult conversations either. So maybe you've done the self-work and the preparation to be ready for a difficult conversation where you're like, I've done the work. I know it needs to happen. I've looked at my emotions. They're in check. I'm prepared, man. I know exactly what the goal of the conversation is. Let's have it. And then you get to that person and they're like, well, I don't know if I could set a time to have that talk or that conversation. I'm kind of busy right now. All these excuses. One thing that you're going to have to get good at, along with doing all that preparation, is expressing why this conversation needs to happen to that person. You need to be able to express the importance of why this conversation needs to happen. And saying to them, hey, for our friendship, for our relationship as family members, we got to have this conversation sooner or later. I'd rather it be sooner so that we could just have it out and move past this and get better from it.
Yeah.
You can be positive and say, hey, I want this to be a productive conversation. Try and, eliminate some of their fears and hesitations for having it. But really expressing why it's important to you is about all you can do to help a person understand and kind of give up their hesitations when having a difficult conversation.
Yeah.
Another thing that you can do is you can stay composed.
Yeah.
And you can validate their feelings without losing on the issue. So this is a difficult one for me, and that's why I had to read it, because it's not one that just comes easily to my mind. Some of these other ones I can be like, boom, 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 boom. Got it. This one is tough because I came from a home where we navigated conversations with a lot of emotional outbursts. So it's difficult when a person that I'm having a difficult conversation with blows up emotionally to not join them.
Yeah.
That's not something that's easy for me. I have to be super intentional about remaining calm, about remaining kind of passive to their emotional outbursts. And the major way that you can do that, again, is by empathizing, by putting yourself in their shoes, by trying to, instead of focusing on the emotional outburst or the anger or whatever they're expressing, focusing on, how they're feeling.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the being curious and saying, I wonder, because you have two types of people. Maybe there's more, but in my mind, there's two. When someone is starting to do an outburst, you have the people who are going to just give it right back, right? And then you have other people who are just going to like shut down. And so the conversation is now going to be won by the person that has the outburst because the other person is just shut down. And so keeping your composure and not taking that outburst as an attack personally on you is going to help you stay composed, not lose your cool, not shut down. And it's going to help you say, I wonder, and ask that person, why are you so upset when I say that? Whatever it is that they're freaking out about, to just ask respectfully, like, why do you feel that way? Or why do you think that? Or why do you, whatever it is. And then that's going to validate how they feel, because obviously they're very upset. Hopefully they're not doing an outburst to manipulate you. But if they're truly just feeling on the defensive and feeling upset, that's gonna change. I think that will change the whole conversation, because when you're not yelling back at them or freaking out back at them, you feel usually foolish to keep freaking out.
Yeah. And while you're doing that, you're not losing sight of the goal.
Yeah.
You're not losing sight of what this conversation is ultimately all about. You're allowing them to have their outburst, and you're, empathizing with it, and you're allowing them to kind of navigate past that, and then bringing the conversation back to what we were just talking about. Let them have their little fit, and let's get back to business on discussing this difficult thing.
Yeah.
And getting to resolution with it. And with that, you need to set boundaries. So how you're able to navigate those outbursts and how you're able to stay focused also helps with, or also is a part of having just boundaries when you go into that conversation. Yeah. Yes, you want to navigate those emotional outbursts with empathy and with, just to be able to keep the conversation going in that way. But there is a limit.
Oh, yeah.
So there is a time, like I've said, with staying calm and taking breaks and stuff like that. There's a time where you're just like, this isn't going anywhere productive.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we're done. And you just call it. You just call it right there.
And I that takes practice, I think. But as you do it, you'll get better at it, and you'll know quicker when the conversation isn't going to go anywhere, or when there's still hope.
Yeah.
for the person to calm down, or for you to calm down so that you can finish the conversation. You kind of learn as you do it. You get better at seeing when it's just not going to work, and you need to pause and restart or try another time.
Can I just tell like a real world example of this that I've seen, that boundaries need to be set in order to navigate this? A lot of times you'll go into a difficult conversation and that person will just start throwing haymakers at you, figuratively, by name calling and bringing up all of these examples that you're like, whoa, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, do you actually feel that way? Like, that's when you need to pause whatever conversation you wanted to have and whatever goal you had and say, let's focus on this for a sec. Are you just saying this because you're angry, or is this actually how you feel about me? Because I've had people say awful things to me, and I'm like, what? You've never told me this before.
Right.
Like, is this real, or is this emotion?
Right.
Because
defensiveness.
Yeah. And you have to know the difference. So one boundary that you can set is like, I'm not going to just have these names just thrust at me,
right,
that I'm this type of person, or I do these types of things, especially if I don't.
Yeah.
If I'm aware enough that I don't, I'm going to have that conversation with the person.
It's just like when we were saying you need to be specific. It's not fair for them to just throw random things at you when you're talking about a specific thing.
Yeah.
And so that's a good point. I never thought of that.
Because you have to understand, and this is why you're able to empathize with the person, is because hopefully you prepared. A lot of times they didn't. You're having this conversation, you have a goal for it, so you have to be the person that has empathy.
That might be avoidant behavior too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just don't want, yeah, exactly. They don't want to kind of broach this topic or subject or whatever the difficult
Yeah.
conversation is. So they just default to name calling and, this is how I'm better than you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, they just don't want to have it.
Right.
They just don't want to have it. But yeah, you need to set a boundary though. Like, hey, we're not going to deviate from the goal of this conversation. We're going to address whatever new things you're going to bring up and make sure those aren't real things before we move on. Because you can't just pretend or forget that happened.
Yeah, that'll distract you.
It'll distract you, and then maybe you'll get done the conversation somehow, get to resolution for your goal, but now you have this other thing that you have to talk about.
Yeah.
Someone can't just make statements like that, especially family and friends.
Yeah.
And then just move on like, oh, that was just my emotions. Like, well, you said some nasty things.
Yep.
And I've had that happen, and sometimes there's just been cases where I've just had to say, okay, we're just name calling now for the sake of name calling. I don't believe that you actually think this way about me, and I don't actually think the names that I called you. Let's start over. You can do that as well. What's another thing for setting boundaries? Just being consistent.
Yeah. Just make sure you maintain them.
Right. If you're going to have a boundary, don't move the boundaries.
Yeah.
Because especially if you are having multiple difficult conversations with the person, which you kind of should, like you're always going to have new difficult conversations with family. You're always going to have new difficult conversations with friends. Make sure to have the same boundaries.
Yeah.
You've heard the term moving the goalpost.
Yeah.
That's a football term, but like it's the same thing in relationships. Don't move the goalposts.
Yeah.
Because that person needs to know how far they can push in a conversation. Because sometimes you have to push a little bit back and forth with each other to get somewhere.
Right.
That's okay. A little back and forth pushing is okay, as long as that person knows your boundaries.
Right.
Or at least you're able to express them when they cross a boundary.
Right.
And that boundary doesn't change.
Yes.
It's
just a matter of self-respect and respecting the other person.
Right. So I think that's helpful just for navigating the challenges that are going to arise when you're having a difficult conversation. Let's talk about how to repair after a difficult conversation. Because I think
this is like super important, I think.
Because you just went through something hard, and we shouldn't just discount it as, well, that was difficult. I hope they,
I hope they're fine.
I hope they're okay. I hope, I hope this hasn't like ruined or changed our relationship in any way. It definitely has.
Yes.
And that's okay, because you have to have that for deepening the relationship and for personal growth. You have to. But it is going to change the relationship. You don't go through something like a difficult conversation or a conflict and come out perfectly the same.
Right. Well, the goal is to have a stronger relationship afterwards. So hopefully it will better your relationship. Like the change is hopefully positive. Right. But I think it's helpful to just follow up with that person. Like, I think in a marriage relationship, this is super important, but it's important in other relationships. But we will check in with each other, like after we've had a difficult conversation, just to be like, hey, like, how are you doing?
Right.
And checking in, but then also just expressing like your thankfulness, your gratitude of that person and for the relationship that you have with them.
Well, and just for having the conversation.
Yeah. And thanking them for.
You'll do that sometimes with me, where you'll just say like, thank you for talking to me about this.
Right.
And like, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm the type of person where I don't mind conflict as much as you.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I know when it's important, when you have a difficult conversation that you want to have with me, it's more important to you that I had it.
Yes.
And that we made it through to the other side unscathed. So yeah. So I think like thanking that person for just having the conversation, going through it, and coming out on the other side is very important. Yeah, you talked about follow up. I like the last one too, and this is something I don't do well, but I like the idea, and I want to implement this more into my difficult conversations, and that's asking for feedback.
Like afterwards?
Yeah. It could be
like right after or like a day after or something.
Nah, maybe a day after. Maybe give it
It feels
some time.
weird to do it right after,
Yeah.
I would think.
How would you rate this conversation on a scale of 1 to 5?
Send them a Google survey.
Yeah. Like after you like buy something, you have all these like, how was your experience on the website? You know? Yeah.
What could I do to improve? Okay.
Yeah.
That's
But I like the idea of, next time you're with the person, the next day, something like that, and just being like, hey, how was that conversation for you? I felt like it went well. Did you feel like it went well?
Yeah.
And that's really important because sometimes they're like, you know what? I wasn't truthful during that conversation.
That is not abnormal. Especially if you were the one who did the work and the other person hasn't yet, they might come the next day. They might be like, actually, I just thought of a few more things that I feel like I need to talk through yet. Or I wasn't completely truthful, maybe not purposefully, but just because I was like off my guard.
Yeah.
And now I realize how I feel and what I'm thinking about it. Yeah, it does change things.
Yeah. So maybe just asking like, was this good for both of us?
Yeah.
That's helpful. I'm definitely gonna apply that more. So some key takeaways. Difficult conversations are a process. If you didn't notice through the length of this podcast, if you're still here, thank you. We give thanks for you.
Yeah.
This is something that takes time and takes preparation to do well. It's not something and shouldn't be something that you approach lightly or quickly.
Yeah.
Now, a little caveat to the quickly. I do want you to attack these difficult conversations. And by attack, I mean, I want you to go quickly to checking your emotions, quickly to clarifying your goals. I want you to not wait around and let your emotions stew. I don't want you to wait around and let your thoughts get to places that aren't true, that aren't steeped in truth. And the longer we let something sit, the further away we're actually getting from truth.
And the harder the conversation will be.
The harder the conversation will be when we actually have it. So I don't want you to move quickly in that you are being reactionary. I want you to be responding to whatever the difficult conversation is, which means that you've thought about it, you've planned, you prepared to have that difficult conversation.
I think just remembering that it's a process and you won't be great at it at first, but you'll slowly get better at it. And being aware that it's hard to unlearn the way you've done conversations before. And so it's easy. I find that it's easy, especially with family members, to just go right back into your default. Whatever your default is, it's hard not to just, as soon as it gets difficult, you're just like, okay, default mode. I'm going to do what I always do. And even though it's not helpful, it's comfortable. And so just knowing that it's a process and it just takes time and work and you slowly get better at it.
And let's just continue, because I think this process one can be very deep. You might struggle to do this well for a while. Like going back to what you're talking about with, like defaulting back to old ways of doing things. Like, you're not going to prepare, know your emotions, all of that type of stuff, use correct communication strategies, and come into the conversation and do it well the first time.
Yeah.
It might take a few conversations for you to even get your footing on how to navigate it well.
Yeah.
So don't get discouraged. don't get down on yourself if you don't do it well the first time, because you weren't doing it well.
Yeah.
Like if you're just learning these strategies, if you're just learning how to prepare for a difficult conversation, and I hope this video has been helpful and that this podcast has been helpful, but know that you're going to suck.
Yeah. I think of us in like certain areas that are always like difficult for us to navigate, and that like I can see the progress that we've made. And it's been those times where we've like, it hasn't gone well. And then we do the like follow up, and we'll say, cause now we're not as emotional like the next day or whatever. And we'll be like, yeah, it's hard for me to talk about that. Or I think the reason why I got upset yesterday was because I think that you think this when you say these things. And so since you're close with the person that you're trying to have the difficult conversations with, it's okay to go back and be like, okay, this part's hard. And then you'll get better at it, and you'll know how to navigate those conversations better the next time. And yeah, so I think about those areas for us, and we've gotten so much better. And I think it will just get better from there because we know each other better. We know the boundaries in those areas better. And so, yeah, that's just super helpful.
Yeah. Practice makes perfect.
Yeah.
And you need to engage in these conversations and stop running from them, stop fearing them, because like going back to the beginning, you're going to deepen your relationships if you engage, if you have the difficult conversations with your family and with your friends. So if you have a family member that you can think of, or a friend that you can think of that you need to have a difficult conversation with, I want you to rewind. I want you to go back to the timestamps of how you're going to prepare for that conversation. And I want you to look at how you're going to communicate well during it. And I want you to navigate the challenges well because you're aware of how they might arise. And then I want you to be able to, after the difficult conversation, know how you can maintain and repair and rebuild and just kind of continue with that relationship so that it is just deepened and it's just you're growing together through that difficult conversation. So if you have that person in mind, make sure that you go and you talk to that person soon. Remember the resource of the Ladder of Integrity. That is such a helpful resource. You can find that online. Just look it up and go through those questions. It's a ladder. So you go from the bottom to the top. And by the time you reach the top, you're going to have greater clarity on what you need to talk about, on what the actual goal of the conversation you need to have is. So go do that this week. Is there anything else that you have that you want to talk about?
I mean, there's one more thing. It's in the notes, but I think it's important to say is that don't own their reactions or their like don't burden yourself with how they react or feel. Tell me if you disagree with this from that conversation. Like if you went into it as genuinely and respectfully, sincerely as possible, you're there to build the relationship, but you're not responsible for how they feel. I'm just putting that out there to say, like, don't come away like feeling guilty because you had a conversation that you felt like needed to be had and maybe it didn't go as well as you thought. Mm-hmm. I mean, hopefully you didn't do anything actually purposely to harm them. Then that's on you and you do need to address that. But sometimes people will, when you're having a hard conversation, if they have a lot of emotions or they are upset, as long as you are being as respectful as you can, you don't have to carry that as a burden on your shoulders.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Sure. You own your part of the conversation. You can't do anything to control their part.
Yeah.
And as long as you're prepared, as long as you want the relationship to be deepened and you're empathetic to how they feel, that's all you can do. And if they still don't react in a way that is conducive to deepening the relationship or to having a productive conversation, that's not your fault. You can't do any more to help that situation other than maintaining that relationship if so desired, especially if they're a family member. Sometimes you have to, and maybe approaching the conversation at a later time in a different way.
Yeah.
And maybe you could go away from that failed attempt and come to some discovery of a better way to do it next time.
Yeah.
And that's about all you can do when dealing with another person. You can't control them. You can't force them to feel or act in any way.
Because if you let that burden you, you'll be very discouraged to try again. From experience.
Yeah.
So if you take that on, like, it will be hard. It will be a lot harder to have other conversations, especially with that person, because you feel responsible for how they feel when you are just genuinely trying to strengthen the relationship.
Yep. All right. So anything else that you can think of that would help navigate a difficult conversation, put that in the comments. Make sure to email us. You can DM us. You can communicate with us in any way that you're most comfortable. Let us know if there's more stuff that we talked about today that you found just very helpful that you can just let other people know about on how to navigate difficult conversations with family and friends. I hope this has been helpful for many of you. Thank you for getting this far. If you have, we love you all. We'll see you on the next podcast. Goodbye.